now finds you guilty on the indictment charging you with the involuntary manslaughter of the person Conrad Roy III.
He screamed at me, "You're a f***ed up person, and you're a f***ed up person."
Michelle Carter, the girlfriend who begged her boyfriend to commit suicide. In 2014, the tragic suicide of Conrad Roy III shocked the nation. At the center of the controversy was his girlfriend, Michelle Carter, who prosecutors alleged played a role in his death. After a lengthy and highly publicized trial, a verdict was finally reached. The trial began with prosecutors alleging that Carter, then 17, repeatedly urged Roy to commit suicide through texts and phone calls, even as he expressed fear and hesitation. They presented evidence of hundreds of text messages between the two, in which Carter encouraged Roy to take his own life, telling him it was his only option and that she would be there for him. Defense attorneys argued that Carter was struggling with mental health issues and was not responsible for Roy's actions. They pointed to messages in which she expressed concern for him and tried to dissuade him from killing himself. They also argued that Roy was already intent on taking his own life and that Carter did not cause his death. Throughout the trial, emotional testimony was heard from both sides, including from members of Roy's family, who spoke about the devastating impact of his suicide on their lives. Ultimately, the jury had to decide whether Carter's actions met the legal definition of manslaughter. After deliberating for several days, the jury returned a guilty verdict, finding Carter responsible for Roy's death. In her sentencing hearing, the judge called Carter's actions reckless and a wanton and reckless disregard for human life before sentencing her to 15 months in prison. The case has been controversial, with many legal experts debating whether Carter's actions met the legal definition of manslaughter and whether a person can be held responsible for someone else's suicide. However, the verdict and sentence mark a legal victory for prosecutors and the Roy family, who have been seeking justice for Conrad's death. The case has also sparked national conversations about the dangers of social media and how it can be used to encourage harmful behaviors. The verdict and sentence may set a precedent for future cases where individuals use technology to influence or manipulate others. As the trial ends, the nation grapples with the tragedy of Conrad Roy's suicide and Michelle Carter's role. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of taking mental health seriously and seeking help when struggling with suicidal thoughts or behaviors. Shayna Hubers. Can I keep my phone if I go to jail? In 2012, the small town of Highland Heights, Kentucky, was rocked by a shocking crime that left one man dead and his former girlfriend on trial for murder. The victim was 29-year-old Ryan Poston, a promising attorney who had recently ended his relationship with 21-year-old Shayna Hubers. Hubers was accused of shooting Poston 6 times in the head, neck, and torso in his condominium on October 12, 2012. During her trial, Hubers testified that she acted in self-defense after Poston became physically abusive, and she feared for her life. However, the evidence presented during the trial suggested that Hubers had planned the murder and acted out of jealousy and rage. The trial began in 2015 and lasted for several weeks, with the prosecution and defense presenting their cases to the jury. Hubers' defense team argued that she was a victim of domestic violence and had acted in self-defense. At the same time, the prosecution presented evidence of Hubers' premeditation and motive for the murder. The prosecution called several witnesses to testify, including Poston's friends, family members, and forensic experts who analyzed the crime scene and the bullets recovered from Poston's body. The defense called several witnesses to testify to Hubers' abuse claims, including her mother and a psychologist who evaluated her. Ultimately, the jury found Hubers guilty of murder and recommended a sentence of 40 years to life in prison. Hubers was taken into custody and transported to a state prison to begin serving her sentence. The case gained national attention for its unusual circumstances, including that Hubers had reportedly sent text messages to a friend bragging about the murder and expressing excitement about the attention she was receiving. The case also sparked debate about using the battered woman defense in domestic violence cases. Hubers' conviction and sentence were upheld on appeal, and she remains imprisoned. The case serves as a tragic reminder of the devastating impact of domestic violence and the need for resources and support for victims. Ezra McCandless. 50 years in jail. In 2018, a small town in Wisconsin was rocked by a gruesome murder case that captivated the nation's attention. The trial of Ezra McCandless, accused of murdering her boyfriend, Alex Woodworth, was set to begin. The prosecution argued that McCandless committed the murder in jealousy and rage. At the same time, the defense claimed that McCandless was a victim of abuse and acted in self-defense. The trial promised to be a high-profile and emotionally charged affair. The prosecution began by painting a picture of McCandless as a manipulative and jealous girlfriend who had become increasingly possessive of Woodworth. They argued that on the night of the murder, McCandless had confronted Woodworth about his infidelity, leading to a heated argument that ended with McCandless stabbing Woodworth to death. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, including bloodstains on McCandless's clothes and the murder weapon, which they claimed linked her to the crime scene. The defense countered by arguing that McCandless was a victim of domestic abuse at the hands of Woodworth. They presented evidence that Woodworth had a history of violent behavior towards McCandless and that she had acted in self-defense when she stabbed him. The defense also argued that McCandless suffered from PTSD and dissociative identity disorder, which made her particularly vulnerable to abuse. After several days of testimony and arguments, the jury returned a guilty verdict. In the aftermath of the trial, there was much discussion about the role of mental illness in the case and whether McCandless had been treated fairly by the justice system. McCandless was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 50 years. The trial of Ezra McCandless was a highly publicized and emotional affair that captured the nation's attention. While the prosecution argued that McCandless was a manipulative killer, the defense countered with claims of abuse and mental illness. In the end, the jury found McCandless guilty of murder and sentenced her to life in prison. The case continues to spark debate and discussion about the role of mental illness in criminal cases and the importance of fair treatment for all defendants. Jodi Ann Arias. Life without parole. Jodi Ann Arias was accused of brutally murdering her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander. The trial has been filled with shocking details, intense emotions, and much focus on Arias' reactions. Today, we'll report on the latest developments and Arias' behavior in court. First, let's give some background on the case. Travis Alexander was found dead in his home in 2008, and it was quickly determined that he had been shot in the head, stabbed multiple times, and his throat had been slit. After investigating, police arrested Jodi Ann Arias, Alexander's ex-girlfriend, who had a tumultuous relationship with him. Arias initially denied involvement in the murder but later changed her story, claiming self-defense. Throughout the trial, Arias' behavior has been closely scrutinized, with many focusing on her actions in court. During the trial, Arias was often seen crying and wiping away tears, mainly when graphic details of the murder were discussed. She sometimes actively avoided looking at crime scene photos and evidence. However, there have also been times when Arias has displayed bizarre and inappropriate behavior. She has been seen smiling and giggling during cross-examination. She has even made strange comments, such as stating that she preferred to wear her hair in a bun because it reminded her of a ninja. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Arias' behavior was not simply a result of being overwhelmed by emotions. Witnesses have testified that Arias had a history of lying and manipulating and exhibited unstable behavior. In fact, one of her former boyfriends testified that she had stalked him after their relationship ended. Ultimately, the jury found Arias guilty of first-degree murder in 2013. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, Arias' behavior was a subject of much discussion, with some questioning whether her emotional reactions were genuine or calculated. The trial of Jodi Ann Arias was a shocking and emotional case that captured the nation's attention. While the focus on Arias' behavior in court may have seemed like a sideshow at times, it ultimately played a role in the jury's decision to convict her of murder. As this case shows, court reactions can significantly impact the outcome of a trial.